at church, I think it was somewhere between when I was 8 and 10 years old, I asked some of the teachers at church, say if the kids are making fun of me or something like that, should I just make fun of myself? And the end result of that was a whole range of bad behaviors.
This is the Best of the Week on Relevant Radio.
I'm joined by ace daughter and ace therapist, Monica Hinderer. And when Monica's on, we talk about all things kind of family-related, child-related, child-rearing, parenting kinds of things. And Monica does a lot of work with individuals. I do a lot of work with couples. But a lot of the work I do with couples, they end up talking about problems with their children. And a lot of the work Monica does with children, they end up talking about problems with the parents. So it's a good intersection of her exposure and experiences and mine as well. So talking about criticism and what happens when children feel that they are constantly criticized. And we attack it from two perspectives. We attack it from the perspective as a parent. How can you correct your children when they're behaving badly, but without falling into the trap of criticism? It's an important parental skill to have. And then we also take it from the perspective of the adult. If you grew up in a home where there was a lot of criticism going on, you were criticized, and you're falling into one of these behaviors as an adult, these traps, or your self-image, your self-esteem has been negatively impacted by that. Well, what can you do as an adult to kind of overcome that, right? Children who feel secure and supported are likely to go on to have healthy relationships with themselves and with others. And they're likely to go on to have good, solid marriages. But kids who are constantly criticized, may hear their caregiver's voice in their head through their entire adulthood, right? They can constantly hear mom's voice or dad's voice, and it becomes their inner critic. And that can pose all kinds of problems, right? So if the parent is consistently critical and negative, it sets the foundation for a lot of unhealthy behaviors and negative self-image later in life. And it can condition the child to be overly critical, and that shows up in a number of different ways. That shows up in lower self-esteem in adults, in perfectionism, which we run into, and Monica tends to run into perfectionism under the guise of scrupulosity with some of the kids that she works with. Negative self-talk, I'm no good, I'm never going to amount to anything. Difficulty accepting compliments, and being hypercritical of others, or I'm always on the lookout to find out what's wrong with everybody else. That's not a good skill to have in marriage, where I'm constantly looking to how I can, what's wrong with my spouse, right? So today we're going to tackle hyper-defensiveness, right? This idea that I've got to protect myself and defend myself all of the time. So people who, who grow up in a home with frequent criticism, some of them will develop this idea that I'm constantly under the microscope. And people are constantly evaluating my every step and passing judgment on me, passing negative judgment on me. So as a result, they get conditioned to anticipate criticisms before they show up and get ready to defend themselves at a moment's notice. So they're on high alert, protecting themselves, and they protect themselves through defensiveness. And so they're always, on the outlook or on the lookout for someone who's going to hurt me, hurt my heart. Okay. Does that make sense, Monica?
Yeah. So I think what else we see is sometimes things can come across as criticism. So sometimes some parents are going to say, well, I have a really defensive kid, but I don't think I'm that critical. I remember working with a family one time where the parents were like, we're not critical. It's our job to teach them though. And so sometimes I think we have to take a step back and recognize that it's not always our intention. A lot of times it's the way it's received. And maybe we have a sensitive kiddo who sometimes our words land heavier on them. And any parent listening who has multiple children is going to be able to tell you that each one is a unique individual with a unique set of skills and a unique set of needs. So sometimes when we notice our kid can be defensive, it's because maybe everything I did was questioned. Why'd you do it? Why'd you do it that way? What were you thinking? And it might not have come from a bad place from the parents, right? They may be looking for kind of understanding, but it's sort of in the way that they did it. So this child, the hyper-defensive child, learns, I always have to have a reason and an explanation for everything, and I always have to defend myself. So the first words out of my mouth, instead of accountability and acceptance, are going to be defensiveness.
Yeah, right. And so mom and or dad become someone that's dangerous to me. I have to protect myself, right? And the challenge is, if that's how I grow up, I have to protect myself from the people in life who love me the most. I'm going to have to do the same with the person I marry someday. I'm going to look at them kind of as an enemy as well. So I think one of the things parents can do is, and I think this is this is good even in marriage too, but criticize the behavior, but not the child. Okay? So that thing, you broke the window. We need to pay more attention as to, where you're throwing the ball and what you're doing and where you're hitting the ball so that we don't break a window. You're a great kid. I love you. And you got a great arm. You might even be a pitcher in Major League Baseball someday. But we've got to make sure that we throw the ball, in a direction where there is no glass that can be broken. So we challenge the behavior, but we don't criticize the child. We don't run out there and say, "What's wrong with you? Couldn't you see this window? You want to stay away from criticizing the child."
Yeah, and if it does go a little bit too far, right? Parents are human and they're going to make mistakes and they're going to have a bad day and they're going to be reactive. And so I always say the repair is actually more critical to the development of that child than the mistake you made.
Oh, say more.
So I think I say that the repair is more critical because there's a lot our child can learn in simply repairing. So it's apologizing, which teaches them it's okay to make mistakes. Even adults or people in authority are not always correct, or they make mistakes, or mom and dad love me enough to circle back, right? To check in on me after something has happened. This is going to help with the defensiveness, because what that parent is doing is they're taking ownership and accountability of what they did. And maybe it wasn't the best decision they could have made. And so what we want is, we don't want our children growing up thinking everything always has to be perfect, because that's not reality. That's not true. What we want them growing up with is resilience, with kind of an attitude or a spirit of, I can come back, fix and change and amend things, which happens when you repair with them, not when you're the perfect parent.
And some parents have a hard time with this, but to apologize to your child when you got it wrong, I think is pretty important. Sometimes parents have a hard time with that because they think they're the authority figure. They should be perfect. The kid should always respect them. And if I admit to doing something wrong, maybe they won't respect me. And exactly the opposite is what happens. The child learns to respect you even more. And you teach the child a really good skill, the skill to apologize when you get it wrong. Because if mom and dad can apologize, boy, I should be able to do that as well.
Yeah, and I think that the apology and so forth teaches our children that it's okay to be imperfect. That's important for them to learn. It's okay to ask for forgiveness or to seek amends. That's really big. We expect them to go to confession and to do all these things, or we expect them to believe that God is a merciful and forgiving being, but are we, right? And kind of recognizing that we're this window into this child's worldview. And then also thinking that it really does teach our children that we don't just by default accept any kind of behavior that a person in authority gives us, right? In that if we never apologize, or if we're always right, or if we're always kind of in this rigid space, the child kind of learns that people in positions of power and authority are allowed to treat us kind of any way that they want, or that they're infallible. And that's not a healthy sentiment to leave our children with.
One of the challenges that perhaps you're facing as an adult, if you grew up in a hypercritical family, is it's hard for you to listen to feedback, and you become very argumentative, right? So someone will say something to you, and you immediately, it results in an argument. Or maybe somebody who's kind of like that, who is so argumentative, and it's because they feel they need to protect themselves, because any contrary evidence, they're going to react very strongly to protect their heart, because that's how they grew up, and that's the message they received growing up in a really critical home. Let's go out to David and see what David has to say. David, welcome to Marriage Unhindered.
Yeah. I was kind of coming from a little bit different angle of where, when I was growing up, I had a problem where I wasn't necessarily doing something bad, quote unquote, but where I was getting in significant trouble for what was happening to me, where I was getting beaten up when I was a kid. Basically, between second and third grade, I had a significant illness where I even slept for several days.
Oh, my.
And then had to be on medication when I went to third grade. And when I was in third grade, I was getting beaten up, both verbally and physically. The kids I grew up with were not the best. Of course, I would go home upset because of this behavior, and then get told off, well, you must be going around with a chip on your shoulder, and was even, I remember the line of, you must be telling the other kids, come on, hit me. And I had this behavior going on for several years, and at one point, like when I was hearing this, I just kind of took it in, and at one point at church, I think it was somewhere between when I was 8 and 10 years old, I asked some of the teachers at church, well, say if the kids are making fun of me or something like that, should I just make fun of myself? And the kind of the end result of that was a whole range of bad behaviors for myself, as self-deprecating behaviors going on through into adult.
Tell me a little bit about the family that you grew up in. Do you have other siblings? Are you the oldest?
Well, I had 2 other siblings. I was in the middle.
You were in the middle. Okay. Do you have an older brother or an older sister?
Well, I had an older sister.
Older sister. So she didn't really come to your defense either, your protection, and then you got home and your parents weren't supportive either of your situation, and then you kind of grew up thinking, yeah, I'm not that great of a kid. And so
what's more troubling to me was the fact that I was being blamed for the bad behavior of these kids.
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess I want to start by saying, David, I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I'm sorry that at that time you didn't have anyone in your life who helped you see that, regardless of how you were treating like other kids or so forth. You didn't deserve to be treated that way, and I'm sorry that someone wasn't able to step in and protect you in that space.
For sure. And you know what, we've learned a lot about bullying since then, and I think schools are doing a better job of that. Have you ever been able to talk to your parents about it in hindsight, now that you're an adult?
Oh, actually, one time I did once years ago, and then the response I got was that the intention was, I think it was on a specific issue, was to prop up my confidence. And I don't know how that would have propped up my confidence. It certainly didn't.
Sometimes the dad is kind of like, I'm trying to toughen you up and turn you into a man, and you got to take it or whatever. And I think, and a part of it, David, I think, is parents generally are doing the best they can, and I'm sure they didn't know what to do with it, and the teachers weren't sure either. As an adult, have you been able to move beyond it, do you think, or is it still kind of present in your life?
That's kind of part of it. It did create a lot of problems for me in my adulthood. I'm just bringing it up because it did. Yeah. And my personal opinion is it may have just been embarrassment and pride why I ended up getting that embarrassment that was happening, that sometimes some families don't like to see someone being, and so they kind of push the problem on them.
Sure.
Don't like to see that in the family. And so they blame the individual that's receiving the bad treatment. And so that's what I kind of conclude. I don't know what you would think on that, but.
Sure. So I think sometimes it's easier to blame the person in our life because that's within my control. It's much harder to sit with any individual, specifically a young child, and sit with them in their pain and in their discomfort and not be able to fix, change, or solve any of it. Because sometimes I can't control what's happening to you outside this home. And that is much more difficult. So if they're not emotionally mature enough to handle that, if they don't have the resources to handle that, it's easier to just look at you and say, I can't tolerate that pain and discomfort, so you just stop doing whatever it is you're doing and it'll all go away.
Yeah, right, because they don't know how to handle it either. And so if we can just push it under the rug, right? I think, David, for you, I think part of it is, I'm very edified by how well you're able to articulate what happened. Which means you've thought about it a lot and you've processed it. I think, for you to get in a habit of perhaps some self-affirming behavior, some realizing what your qualities are and your skills are, maybe take that to prayer, because God made you into a wonderful human being with wonderful talents and skills. And to kind of pour your heart out to our Lord and say, Lord, help me understand, who I am and what I am and the beauty that you made me, the wonderful qualities that you gave me. Help me understand my true dignity and my true value. And I think that's a prayer that he would be happy to answer for you.
Yeah, and I think that kind of says that it's something I wish I had maybe heard long ago.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
At least consistently. I may have heard it sometimes, but at the same time, it was with this frequently with this other message that you're responsible was very mixed.
Final chapter has not been written yet, my friend. And you can write a new chapter. It ain't over, my friend. It ain't over. And you know what? If an individual therapist could be helpful for you, don't hesitate. Go get some individual therapy. Work through it, but fine. You're a creature made in the image and likeness of God, which gives you infinite value and worth. And don't accept the voices that you hear in your head telling you that you're not. Like what you just heard? Share it with your family and friends.